So good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma for the last installment of this year's monthly webinar series. I'm Ajia Meux, Communications and Project Manager, and we are proud of this expansion of NCORE to this monthly series. Our hope is that we've continued the conference's tradition of working to improve racial and ethnic relations on college campuses by providing virtual learning opportunities. Since August 2018, we've accumulated about 1,000 views on issues ranging from disability services to social media and race, all the way to identity formation. If you missed the webinar, most are available for on-demand viewing. Please go online and check out what's there. And we'll resume our webinar programming in August of 2019. Make sure you're live posting. We always want you to live post. We want to know where you're watching. So tweet and Instagram and Facebook pictures from your office with the hashtag NCORE and the hashtag Start the Conversation Online. You may end up in a very special NCORE video, wink, wink. Today we have Sedelta Oosahwee from the National Education Association, Michael Riley from DePaul University, Emma Coddington from Willamette University, and Nathan Nguyen from West Michigan State. Together, we will discuss some of the basics of NCORE and the powerful transformational experience that can occur from the perspectives of folks at different stages in their participation. The center is grateful for their expertise. I also want to mention that this will be the largest NCORE ever. We have surpassed in registration this year the number that we had last year in New Orleans, and we still have 30 days to go. So we're really excited about this. This is going to be an amazing experience in Portland this year. So let's start with some mini introductions. We're gonna start with you telling us a little bit about who you are, where you are, how long you've been affiliated with NCORE, and help us understand how you'd like to be identified by telling us your pronouns. And we'll start with you, Sedelta.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Sedelta Oosahwee. I am an enrolled citizen of the 3 affiliated tribes. It's the Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara Nation. I'm also Cherokee. I currently live in Washington, D.C., and I work for the National Education Association. I have been to NCORE 12 times now. I began going as a student. I was a presenter in my very first year. Ajia, do you want us to go into like how we got into NCORE in this question, or is that the next one? I'm sorry.
No, you can, please. Okay. How'd you find out about NCORE?
It was as a student presenter. I was a sophomore. We had done a retention program, and so a couple of my students and we got together and we presented at NCORE in Miami. I had no idea what the conference was, but I came back a couple years later as a graduate student to present again. It's kind of interesting because my first year I was actually a student scholarship recipient. And from that time, I went on to become a National Advisory Council member. I helped with the programming for an Indian NCORE, and I have been an intern for NCORE. So I have kind of, NCORE has been along with me in my journey and my development, and I credit NCORE for so much of the person I am today. 12 years ago, this is gonna be my 13th, lucky 13. Okay.
Hi y'all, my name is Michael Akeem Riley. I use he, him, his pronouns, or Michael is fine. I'm coming to you from Chicago, Illinois, where I work at DePaul University as the LGBTQIA+ Research Center Coordinator within the Office of Multicultural Student Success. It's a very long title. I've been going to NCORE for 10 years since San Diego, 09. It's been a 10-year decade. Started off also as a student, my undergrad at a small school in Minnesota called Hamline University. Had like an NCORE delegation where students, faculty, and staff all together like prepared for NCORE during the academic year. Then that summer went out, learned a bunch of things, and then we programmed the next year after. And so I've been going since then, and it's been a huge part of my own experience and my own like evolution of identity. I think now I have the privilege of working really closely with NCORE, helping out in a variety of ways, particularly as the QT-POC caucus chair, which is a huge honor that I'm super privileged to be a member of, and facilitating a variety of different workshops on the interplay and intersections around LGBT issues and racial issues. NCORE really helped me really learn that those two things can be and should be celebrated all the time. And yeah, really been a really big part of my professional practitioner journey, as well as just me as like a Black queer person living life right now in this regime and what's going on in the world. So I have a lot of things for NCORE, and it definitely feels like a big, loving, growing, expanding family. I'm really proud to be here.
So hi, my name is Nathan Nguyen. I am coming to you from Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I am an Asian American, second generation, first in my family to go to college. I started going to NCORE back in 2012. So not including Portland, I have been to 6 NCOREs. I am also the former co-chair for AppNCORE, and I identify as a trans man, so my pronouns are he, him, his. And so, yeah, I found out about NCORE when I was working at an institution in Jacksonville, Florida. We had a small diversity committee that was, trying to create some synergy around faculty and staff, and they were able to find funding to send 3 people to NCORE. So the very first one I attended was back in 2012 in New York City, and I have been involved ever since 2014. So it's been a really great experience, and I'm looking forward to talking about it more.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Coddington, and I'm coming to you from Salem, Oregon, at Willamette University, where it's a small liberal arts college on the West Coast here. And I'm in the faculty in the sciences. Home for me is here and New Zealand. And as a white woman in the sciences, I was really drawn into NCORE for many different reasons. Feel free to refer to me, she, her, hers. I am a total newbie. I started NCORE last year. I was called in thanks to Chris Cullinan, who I'd been working with for many years, bringing her in to do consulting and help us do our work. And she in turn invited me to come and work with her on one of the workshops. But before that, I'd known about it because Liz Bahi, who was our Native American program director at the time, and Gori Toyama had really, had just come back from an NCORE together, and I was on the Multicultural Affairs Committee learning about this amazing space. So I was very honored and stoked to get the invitation to work with Chris. So thanks.
So I'll introduce myself a little bit and my experience with NCORE. So I came to work for the center in January of last year. So last year was my first NCORE, and Dr. Jana Rungu, who was the director and who is currently in a position of Associate Vice President interim here at the university. She and Dr. Bisco sort of saw something in me and invited me to come and work. And so I didn't know where I was coming. I didn't know that I got to travel. And I didn't know that I was going to be a part of this amazing experience. So again, New Orleans was my first NCORE, Portland is my second one. And yeah, we'll get into the ways in which NCORE can sort of change you a little later on. So Emma, if we can come back to you, in your role as faculty, what value has NCORE brought to your institution?
Yeah, being a one-time goer, of course. So personally, most of the spaces that I occupy as a faculty member here are really not places where conversations and action is centered around race, equity, and access. And NCORE really opens that up in an incredible way. In fact, it's center stage, and which is why I love it. And it evidences the possibility and that these spaces do exist and can occur, and that we can be participating in it. And institutionally, are learning from in these sessions and spaces, and people that you're fortunate enough to meet, and all the other different spaces, community beyond our own institution. And so these things weave back into my classroom, they weave into how we work together as faculty, and they change how I work with my administration and also student life support people.
So I do primarily LGBT work, which I forgot to mention earlier. Sorry about that. Director of LBGT Student Services here at Western. So going to NCORE has really brought value to me both professionally and personally, and the aspects of that I feel a little bit more competent enough and have the content, like a little bit more content knowledge to have the conversations about race and racism and ethnicity and around access or lack thereof. Another thing is speaking more on the intersectionality of identities. Personally, it has really brought a lot of value to me in the fact that, you know, I was raised in the communities where I didn't have like a really salient identity or community around what it meant to be Asian American. So going to NCORE has really helped solidify that identity, as well as connect with others in the community that are already doing the work.
Yeah, I think I want to echo a lot of the things Nathan was saying around the content that is you kind of can gain at NCORE. I think it can definitely help me and institutions I'm at, because I'm learning more knowledge from other practitioners and folks who have, I don't want to say expertise always, because we're all learning and growing, but everyone is definitely, these are folks who are really like on the cutting edge, really invested in the work. And I think that helps me personally, as well as someone in any institution or anyone who's connected to me. I think another thing that is useful for me for NCORE and how I received like any value from it is like the sense of community that's there. I think particularly going on a whole decade, which makes me feel kind of old. I don't know, we'll have to work through that later. Being there for a whole decade, I really have a sense of community and people there who I can see and have like one meal with, or grab, I don't know, a bagel or something with, get a snack with. And even though we don't see each other throughout any other time of the year, or don't speak too often, like can really get a sense of recharge and community. And I know for me, sometimes navigating through institutions of higher education and their idiosyncrasies and nuances, it's nice to have other folks who are experiencing those things to make you feel a little less alone and a little more empowered to continue fighting the good fight.
So I mentioned earlier, I work for the National Education Association. I actually work in the Center for Social Justice in the Community Advocacy Partnership Engagement. And a lot of people may not realize this, but the National Education Association has begun to explore their work in racial justice in education. They recognize, and we recognize as educators, we have a very unique role to play and a very vital role to play in dismantling these systems. And it's interesting for me being like a Native person, oftentimes we talk about education being empowering, but for our community, it wasn't always the case. And so coming to NCORE and meeting this community has helped me kind of build a vocabulary around the things that we're talking about now. It's created a community for me to help in this work. And as NEA tries to come into this work of racial justice in education, it's allowed me to connect them to people who have been doing this work for a very long time, who've dedicated their life to this. And it's just been invaluable. The experience of NCORE has been invaluable to the work that I'm doing now.
As a Black woman, having gone to NCORE for the first time and having spent prior to going about 2.5 years in academia, it was really powerful for me to see people of color in positions of leadership and authority in academia. That was the transformational piece for me, because when you can see yourself reflected in positions of power, then you feel like it's attainable. And so just on a personal note, I was a graduate student, a master's student in January when I started, and I had no intention on going back to school, no matter how many people tried to sway me, until I went to NCORE. And I literally left NCORE and said, okay, I'll do it. And so I'm starting the doctoral program in August, and I really do credit, I really do credit NCORE for that. So let's get into some of the basic structure of NCORE and the programming itself. What do you think people should pay attention to? How do you feel like folks should structure their time and day while they're there to make the most out of it?
So just a little blurb around NCORE and the basic structure. The day can start pretty early if you're there for not going to pre-con. Well, pre-con starts early too, but if we're focusing on the conference itself, days can start pretty early. Conferences, sessions I think start at 8 or 9. I struggle getting to those earlier ones, but I do know that it's start then, and then there's a variety of different times. It can be 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, hour and a half. And I think that there's also a variety of different tracks and levels that kind of are pronounced throughout there. So something like the intermediate, there may be things that if there's a certain track that you're looking for, the things like intersectionality, if you're looking for something or like around like maybe more chief diversity officer kind of things, there's a variety of different tracks, and all of that's in the booklet itself, which is very big. And I recommend spending some quality time getting to know that before you do too much of anything, or using the app if you're more of a person who's like invested in like, you know, can really navigate your phone well. What else do I want to say about it? Take care of yourself. There's a lot in NCORE and there's a lot of sessions. And I think sometimes, I know my first couple of years, I was like, well, I have to go to everything. And I would oftentimes run myself ragged. I remember one year I couldn't even like find my, like I got lost and I couldn't find my hotel room because I was just so inundated. And so I think it's important for us to spend a little bit of time with yourself, and to like, if you feel like things are feeling heavy and you've learned a lot, it's okay to take a step back and to do some, you know, take some time by yourself, or to do something more fun, to go explore Portland and all of its trees and restaurants and things of that nature that I think should be really cool too. So being able to hold both those things I think is really important. I'm sure everyone else will fill in some of those other points.
Yeah, I kind of want to reiterate a couple things that were said, especially the program guide. I really recommend spending some time with that. It can be an overwhelming document, but it's very user-friendly. You can find tracks that are specific to you. You can find the different speakers, like maybe there's a presenter you want to see, the name will be in the back, and you can find out when and where they will be presenting. And there's different levels, so maybe there'll be an advanced track and you may not feel ready for that. Pay attention to that. It'll tell you what each level is. Intermediate, they'll give you kind of a definition. As far as the setup, it starts out with the pre-conference Tuesday and sometimes into Wednesday morning. Those are really in-depth and long. It's a chance to kind of dive deep into an issue that you might want to pick before going in. And then throughout the conference, as was stated, you have different sessions. They could be an hour, hour and a half. It might be a conversation with somebody, a panel. And just find those ones that you're really interested in. Be sure to take care of yourself. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I can offer people. Get enough sleep, make sure you're eating, make sure you're drinking water. It sounds like a basic thing, but when you get in there, you become so, I guess, just inundated with information and people, and you want to be everywhere all the time, that sometimes we do forget to eat and rest and drink water. And at the end of the week, you will be exhausted emotionally and physically, but at the same time, you'll feel refreshed and ready to go and face another year of work. And I think that's one of the most incredible feelings, is being so exhausted, but also so recharged and ready to go, and feeling like you can handle another year of some of the hard work that we'll be doing.
Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking, what can I add to what Mycall and Sedelta have been putting in there? And I was just thinking, when I was wandering around as a firstie last time, I noticed there's so many spaces for meeting people and for taking time out. And I want to encourage folks to come to the White Affinity Group if you identify as a white person. There's all these other affinity groups in which they have meetings regularly, and I can't remember how regular they are. I only went to 2 last time. And for those of us who are white, just pay attention. There are some of these sessions that are not for us. That's all good.
Sorry, I was like got caught up in the chat there trying to answer some questions at the same time. So some things to pay attention to, not only are the workshop sessions, but also your reactions to workshop sessions. Sometimes they're pretty obvious and other times they're not so obvious. Like when you go to a workshop session or when you leave a workshop session and you suddenly feel exhausted or cranky or whatever. So being able to take a moment to pause and really assess, like, am I reacting to this workshop in a certain way because of the identity as a whole, and this workshop addresses those identities, or if I reached peak limit. You know, I am naturally an extrovert, but even I have my limits. I noticed at the last NCORE, you know, because I've been going to a good amount of them, a lot of people would stop and say, hey, and I'm like racking my brain, like, how do I know this person? And so it's a little unnerving, and I'm sure that'll probably happen now that I've done this webinar. So, you know, I will always say hey back, but I may just look at you a little confused, like, where do I know you from? So, you know, moment of honesty there. I think also pay attention to caucuses. So that, like, as is mentioned earlier, I'm a former co-chair of the API caucus, Asian Pacific Islander caucus. I've also attended the QT caucus. Hopefully this year, hint, hint, NCORE decides to put the QT not at the same time as the other caucuses. So that way, as an LGBT person, I can attend you know, some of the other caucuses, or be able to catch up with colleagues, and also make a connection. Sometimes there's one time I went to NCORE and I actually skipped a session because I really connected with a colleague, and she and I ended up having lunch together and having like a really good discussion about what resources and events that are available for the Asian Pacific Islander community.
So we have a lot of questions coming in. What I'd like for folks to do is use the Q&A box, because we have quite a few people in the session, and we're going to lose questions if they're not put in the Q&A box. And I want to make sure that we get everyone's questions, because there's some great questions. And we're also going to save questions to the end, so that we can get through some of the pre-prepared stuff. So again, use the Q&A box if you have a question, and then we're going to save it until the end. The webinar in March was how to maximize your students' experience if you're taking students with you to NCORE. And one of the things that Vernon Wall mentioned was that, you know, all of us are not at the same level of understanding. We don't have all the same foundational level and foundational levels of learning around race and ethnicity. And so you should be very aware of the level of knowledge each session comes with, right? So if you don't know what critical race theory is, then maybe a session that talks about it in depth and has an intermediate or advanced level may not be the place where you want to start. So again, there's been a lot of questions about the book. You will get the physical book when you get to the conference. And the guidebook app, I believe you'll be able to download a little bit before the conference. But so that time that you'll spend with the book will be the time, maybe that night before sessions start. I'm not sure that you'll be able to plan wholeheartedly, you know, a week before. So let's move to the next question, which is, what can someone do to prepare for NCORE? We talked about the program book. I'm spending some time with that. How did you prepare for the conference? Both, I know for Emma, you didn't necessarily plan for the conference because you didn't know what you were walking into, myself included. But since you've gone a few times, what are some different ways that you can prepare, ways that other folks can prepare?
So things I've done now that I've been to at least 3, I've now going up to number 7 for Portland. For me, I like to decompress by working out, especially if the weather and wherever NCORE is hosted is not awful, because I've lived in the South long enough. I'm done with the heat. So I usually, pack some workout clothes, some running shoes, and, just really explore, also looking at what is available in the area that I might have interest in. So that way I know, like, oh, there's a nice park that I want to go to, and it's going to be quiet and peaceful, or it's like, oh, I want to check out this restaurant or whatever. So something that's completely separate from NCORE, exploring a little bit of the community around there. So that way I can figure out what I can do that I want to explore that can help me decompress and take a moment for myself. Other things that I've done to prepare for NCORE is bring whatever I use to take notes. I type faster than I write, so I am definitely one of those folks that will be on my laptop and typing furiously in my OneNote or any other note-taking app that I prefer to use. Bring tons of business cards if you have business cards, and also a way to keep others' business cards. And what I usually like to do is when I grab somebody's business card is I also write notes on the back of it of, like, why did I grab this person's card? What conversation we had? If I want to bring this person to my respective campus, or have them, because I'm a new doctoral student as well, is, maybe I want this person to tap this person as a resource for any research that I want to do. So those are some things to prepare for NCORE. I think if you're a person that's naturally an introvert, to be prepared of what you need to do to know that you're going to be surrounded by 3,000 plus people, and how you're going to take care of yourself in that, and how you're going to decompress from that, and what you need to do. So yeah.
I think part of the preparation can be looking at the program guide isn't available right now for this year, but looking at the one from last year and maybe the year before, just to kind of get an idea of the types of sessions, the kind of language that's used in there, and the format of it. I think it's good. I like to find out who I know that's going to be there, so we can kind of plan time to meet up and see each other, because sometimes after the day of conferences and meetings, you just want to find those people that you already know and have that relationship with, and maybe go to dinner and just have that fellowship with them, because it can be complicated. I think you need to be prepared to have tough conversations, and whatever you need to do to get yourself in that space and ready to go, I think you need to take time to assess what that might be, because there will be tough conversations, there will be powerful conversations, but just be prepared to kind of be in that space, prepared to be challenged at times, and supported at times. It's just a really kind of, it can be an emotional space to be in, so just kind of be prepared for that. But overall, it's a very empowering experience, and I don't want to make me to scare anyone away from it, but it is a powerful experience, and just kind of prepare yourself for that. And I think that's some of the best advice I can offer for preparation.
If I can just jump in there really quickly, this is a little off the cuff, y'all. They have pre-prepared questions. We talk about transformational and we talk about powerful, and I really want to operationalize that word a little bit, right? I want to give people a little bit of context about what it means to have a powerful or transformational experience at NCORE. Like, what does that mean? And so let's go back to you, Sedelta.
For me, I remember my very first NCORE. As a student, I had grown up in a small town in Oklahoma. I was a Native woman. I didn't really realize a lot of things about the reality that I was walking in and existing, and I didn't really realize how this institution at times could be oppressive. And I was feeling all of these things. I was feeling, I didn't know what the words were, though. I didn't know I was feeling marginalized. I didn't really understand the oppression of the institution and the institutional racism that was kind of built into it. But I was feeling these things as a young person. And at times I felt very alone. I felt like I was crazy, like I didn't belong. And by going to NCORE and meeting the people and sitting in these sessions, I realized that what I was feeling was normal. It was at times designed for that feeling. And I also learned how to start combating those feelings. And by learning about it and by arming myself with the language and the knowledge and the people to push back against that, I can't thank NCORE enough for that. Because if I hadn't had that experience, I don't know if I would be in the place I am now. I don't know if I would have felt empowered, and I don't know if I would have felt confident enough to be in the positions I've been in, to do the work I've done, and to have the support of so many people around me. So when I talk about powerful and transformational, it feels like I went from someone who just felt alone and scared and like I didn't belong to someone who understood why I felt that way and empowered to change that through this conference and community that I built.
Yeah, I want anyone else to kind of jump in there, Nathan or Mycall.
I was waiting for Mycall, whether or not he would unmute. Yeah, kind of echoing what Sedelta has said is that part of going to NCORE, as I mentioned earlier, was like this personal development as well as professional development. And as I said, previous institutions, with the exception of Western, which is where I work at right now, is that I have always worked in institutions where I'm still very much very small, the smaller of the minority, so to speak, right? Because as an Asian American, I've not been in regional schools. I've not been in schools that are either Hispanic serving institutions or HBCUs or anything like that, right? So I'm very much, I stick out. So not having that content knowledge or feeling competent enough to talk about what it meant to be Asian American and my identity and how that interplays with other racial identities in the context of inclusion and equity, and then seeing that struggle with the next group of students who are younger than me, but technically we're the same generation as far as going to college or through citizenship status, it's just a little disheartening, right? So it's like, okay, now I see a reflection of myself of that struggle, but also I see a reflection of myself with other colleagues where maybe they do have a more robust community or more support services, and seeing like, well, why can't we have that, right? And so I really see that, you know, as far as that support and as well as the reinforcement of, okay, here's where we are now, what can we possibly be at the next level, and then also what's also behind us, right? So acknowledging the steps to get to where we need to get to.
This is a really good question, thinking around what does a transformative kind of experience mean at NCORE? And transformative is definitely like I think a very fitting word for how the conference feels, even still, you know, 9 going on 10 years of going. And when I'm thinking about transformative, I'm definitely thinking about the ways in which I'm able to see like the future of educators, practitioners, really, I think, thinking intersectionally, you know, striving for liberation in ways that I didn't always think was possible and plausible. So like, I see that, and I'm like definitely informed and feel empowered and emboldened by some of these folks, some that are younger, some that are older, and I think age and those things can be a little bit more amorphous. In the sense of like who I'm learning, who I'm engaging with, and how impactful those experiences can be. I think that was really transformative. I think for me, the first couple of NCOREs, like a lot of folks shared, being a first generation college student myself, I know for me that just like seeing folks who are doing like equity-based higher education work, focusing on race and identity, et cetera, this was the first time that I met more folks who had these kind of jobs and who really helped like affirm that this is like a path that I could go on. You know, I don't think I'd be doing the work I'm doing now and continuing to do it if I wasn't able to see folks doing it initially, and then folks I think doing it well, folks doing it in ways that maybe I wouldn't have never thought to do. I'm like, oh, I can do that? Like, that's that? And being able to kind of build that has really been really transformative. And I think a whole nother way, which I don't want to take up too much time, but thinking about the knowledge that I'm able to accrue, and that is in sessions, that is in hallway conversations. That's in a kind of like a walk as you're walking somewhere for dinner. And a lot of those things, like after I learned that, your mind is completely blown. Someone says something a way you've never heard, an analogy, a metaphor, a simile. And then after that, like that really transforms me in, I think, a really quick, fast kind of way.
And Emma, do you want to talk about, so we have two questions for you, kind of, sort of, right? So like, how has it been transformational for you? But then also, you know, going back to the question before that, how do you prepare, right? Knowing that it's been transformational for you, how do you prepare for that? And then how do you prepare for that as a white person in the space? I know that's kind of loaded, but.
Oh, no. I need to acknowledge, I watched Liz Bahi and Gordy Toyama prepare and then do a post-op, kind of bring it back together, and then how do they, so I got to watch like what I considered experts from my institution really kind of work with it. And then when Chris invited me, she actually did what Sedelta said, which is sent me past programs and gave me some things to think about. So I went down into that hole. So I think that those really resonated with me. Be ready to think about across institutional positioning, as well as across the layers to colorism, race, racism, white supremacy, how it functions personally and structurally, and just be prepared. Like, these are the conversations that we have, and it's empowering and transformational to see not just how people are engaging with these. For me, it was empowering to see how humanizing it is. And the transformational, like powerful relationships, or even just seemingly very small conversations, is people look at us in the eye and we look at each other and see each other. I mean, you know, however you want to frame that, deep, whatever. For a white person, practice being quiet and observant. We are dwelling in institutions where we as white people have total latitude to take up all the space. And that is where you're entering into a space at NCORE where you are invited to experience a richer way of being in community. And that requires us to be quiet and observant. And it's so much more fun and richer. And it's counter to our classic cultural mandates in our institutions. So that, and then those of us who need access and specific kinds of access, I really encourage you to contact the conference organizers. They're amazing. And you'll already be doing city space watch and hotel contacting. So that's the kind of prep.
So what the idea of this not being a white space is, for me as a Black woman, what makes it so powerful as well, is that being in an academic colored space and hearing about data and research and programs from a colored perspective is really powerful, because that doesn't exist, particularly for, you know, for folks that are at PWIs. That's not present. So yeah, that's what I found uniquely powerful. And so I want to open up the question to other folks around what can white people do to prepare to come to NCORE?
So something that white people can do to prepare to come to NCORE, first off, I'm going to be fairly honest and blunt and say, you know, like stay in your lane and know what lane you're in. Emma touched upon it a little bit earlier. This is a space for practitioners and people of color and students of color, and this is like a chance to finally have community, right? And for some of us who are maybe in more rural areas or areas that don't have a really strong community, this is like our chance to like reconnect, right? And so being able to acknowledge, you know, what lane you're in, but also acknowledge the history. Education historically has, you know, first off, we took the land from the indigenous folks and native folks. And so these institutions are built on native land. There's that. And then not only that, but they're built on the backs of Black and brown people, right? Literally by foundations built on the backs of Black and brown people. And then education as a whole historically has also excluded folks that are seen as different. So that includes also Latinx and Asian communities, right? Because we're kind of seen as this other or not American enough, right? So being able to acknowledge that historically speaking, education has not been built for us, but it's been built by us or on the backs of our labor, right? So that could really peel off a lot of layers of emotions and trauma, and how that can, again, thinking about, you know, to be quiet, to be silent, and to listen, but also to try to move past your guilt and use that guilt to move towards action. And not necessarily action there at NCORE, but action to your respective institutions, because institutions, you know, generally speaking, are predominantly and historically white. And so being able to take that action into spaces where maybe there aren't any people of color there, or there aren't any other marginalized identities in those meetings or spaces with upper administrators, with your board of trustees, whatever it may be, because you have the ability to speak to these upper administration and leaders in a way to get them to understand why it's important. And thinking about how you're bringing this content knowledge back from NCORE, and how you're going to use it to the benefit of your most marginalized students, not to the benefit of the majority, but to your most marginalized students that are not in the majority.
Yeah, I just kind of want to echo a couple of things Nathan said. This will be a space where you won't be centered, and for the first time in your life, it might be the first time that's happened. So kind of be prepared for that. Think of the position you have in your institution and how some of that could be different after attending NCORE. We always say listen, but really actually listen. Don't pretend to listen. That means be quiet at times and just stop and hear what others are saying, and recognize that you've been granted an incredible opportunity to be in spaces where you're hearing conversations from people and narratives from people and research from people that we often don't get to hear from. And we've invited you into that space to do that. And that's an honor, and that should be respected. And at times be prepared to be uncomfortable. It's not a hostile space, but it's a space where we all want to come together and learn from each other. But just be prepared to be uncomfortable, because it will probably happen at one point or another.
I think Nate and Sedelta definitely have touched on a lot of the things I would like to say to white folks in attendance to NCORE. But another gentle ask, I suppose I'll say, is I think NCORE is a really good time, especially when there's folks from a variety of different ages. So you have white folk who are really new to the game and invested, and they're just super excited. And there's like folks who maybe have been, you know, doing the work for a while and maybe are like more like, you know, in the cut. I like to say this is a really good time for you to do a lot of like cousin collecting. When you see a younger white person, or even someone who's a little older, maybe doing something, their whiteness is showing a little bit, like collect that cousin. They're not actually your cousin. Maybe they are your cousin, but like find that person and really have that conversation with one another, because I think that one of the things I'm always asking more of white folks invested in like a anti-racist framework, pedagogy, et cetera, is to do that work with the folks really close to you, as opposed to typically being connected to communities of color. I think that's great that there's like, you know, building alliances, building community across differences, across racial differences is beautiful, but I think this is a really good time for you to practice some of that. Go to those caucus meetings. Like when you see someone doing something, don't wait for a black person of color, a black person, a brown person to be like, hey, that happened and you should do that or say that, or someone else just said the same thing. Really collect each other and really do some of that work. And I think that can be really transformative. Just be comfortable with like not being the center, I think too. Like I can't iterate that enough. I'll leave it there.
So there's an article called Translating the Academy, Learning the Racialized Languages of Academia. by Lilia de Monzo, M-O-N-Z-O, and Suzanne Soohoo, S-O-O-H-O-O. And it talks about how the epistemology of people of color, how people of color come to understand and learn, and that it is in the academy been historically less respected. And so I encourage everybody really to read the article because I think going into NCORE, helping people understand kind of the position of people of color in the academy, the article really undergirds. So I will also say that you should go back and watch the webinars that are available. Some are free, some are not. But it'll help you understand kind of what you're walking into, some of the content that is likely to be there. So you can get an idea. Also, on social media, we've released all the keynote speakers. So go back and look at, research some of the keynotes and see what their platforms are, what their work is about, so that you don't walk in sort of blindsided. And this isn't just for white folks, this is for everybody. I'll also say that not all of us are at the same level of understanding of this work. And to come to the conference respecting where you are, right? So, and don't feel some kind of way about that, right? Just respect where you are in the process, that you're there to learn and be open to learning. But we have some pretty heavy hitters that come to NCORE, and that can be intimidating, right? You may feel like I could possibly not know anything that this person knows, and that's okay. That's why we're there to learn. So we have a few minutes before we start taking questions. So I want to move to the hard takeaways. What are some real facts that people can bring there, and some things that you've been able to pull away from the conference?
Who did you have? What you wanted to go first for that? The hard takeaways. You're muted.
Sorry, you all. So why don't we go in the order of the last question? So Emma, Nathan, Mycall, and Sedelta.
Okay.
I think I'm going to defer to you. I'm going to defer to you three, you four on this. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So some hard takeaways that I've gotten from this conference is definitely a lot of context and community. And I know the community is kind of this ambiguous thing that you can't really like give hard numbers to, but like for someone who is a racial minority or second generation, or in an institution where I'm one of two people who is doing diversity work that's Asian American in the entire division, this is a way to kind of show like this intangible way of saying that, you're not the only one doing this work, right? Some other hard takeaways would be the resources. And so like when somebody has questions like, oh, I want to recommend something for my white colleagues to read in their own time or whatever, I can just easily spout something off the top of my head, right? Or something, or if it's a colleague that's also Asian American, and so on and so forth. So there's usually some things I can, refer to or point to get somebody started on their own journeys. Other hard takeaways would be just the experiences. I mentioned earlier having lunch with a colleague that really helped me gain more content knowledge about what it meant to be Asian American. Also the experiences of, bumping into Dr. Mark Lamont Hill and wow, he's a very charismatic man, right? Like, you know, that sort of thing. Like, how many people can say they bumped into somebody like that and got to shake his hand and thank him for his speech? You know, that sort of thing. So those are some of the hard takeaways that I have.
Sorry, I was like trying to make sure I had my takeaways succinctly. I don't. I think one of the main takeaways is that, which can feel kind of sad, but also is a like little like life-giving community, like I see you, you see me, is the like ways that social justice, like battle fatigue, is like very real, and that happens. You see a lot of folks who are like really tired out. Also, props to Dr. Sarah Furr, who coined the term. I'm not gonna act like it's mine. It's not. So I think it's really powerful to kind of see everyone who's kind of in that, kind of who can be kind of in that space, but also the ways it's important to like work yourself through that. I think that like a social justice fatigue work of folks who are 1 of 4 or 5, or even there's a lot of folks on your campus, there's probably a lot of instances of racism and other isms, other systems of oppression on your campuses. And so even if there's a lot of you, you're probably tired out. And finding ways to sustain yourself in the work is super, super important. And that's a takeaway that I see at NCORE quite a bit. I think like a decolonized or queered kind of way of thinking about knowledge, I can't stress enough like how impactful it can be to be at a session and, you know, get something, but then like if you bump into the presenter or talk to them a little bit after, and most of these folks are super open for that, they're like, yeah, let's get coffee, or you're walking to a caucus together and they share some more things, and those can be just as eye-opening. So really being open to those kind of spaces and not just thinking that, okay, I'm gonna go to this session, I'm gonna do this thing, I'm gonna get all the things in this session, then after that I'm done. But to be open during that whole time you're there, to be able to like gain and acquire knowledge from a variety of different folks. Takeaways that this is a journey, like there's no space that's perfect, your institutions aren't perfect. Other people's institutions also aren't perfect. There's different problems everywhere. I think as Sedelta said earlier that like, and everyone I think has noted that institutions of higher education are rooted in a hegemonic way of being. So the work we're doing is always going to be in resistance of something. And it feels hard and kind of like to say, but to like fall in love with that resistance, that you're going to have to be doing that all the time is I think important, as opposed to thinking that you're going to go to seven NCOREs, you get like a special badge and then you can like wave that. And then like white supremacy will just like kind of like float away. It doesn't work that way. And to find, I think, joy in love and connection with folks, I think is another really important takeaway. And to just be open to the experience. I know that I'm a little like not plan A kind of person. I'm not super structured. And I think that's helped me a lot at NCORE because it allows me to come to things like with open arms, to be like, I thought I was going to this workshop, that didn't happen. I'm at this workshop instead, and that was super impactful. And to really allow those things just to kind of like happen and to be open to different experiences and maybe not just what's just in your guidebook, although the guidebook is great and you should look through it too.
So if I can real quick, Nathan, you had mentioned before that to be prepared, that even though NCORE talks about intersectionality, that it is always coupled with race. And that is the salient topic at NCORE. So could you speak to that again?
Yes. So something I've noticed in doing diversity work, especially since I specifically am doing LGBT work, is that the conversations about race, unless you're a person of color or have really done a lot of personal investigation, is that there are a lot of communities where race is not talked about at all. And not only race, but racism, and inherently knowing that unfortunately, a lot of folks that I've talked to that are kind of hesitant or reluctant to talk about race and racism but think of racism as this binary of like 0 to 100 of, you know, I'm not racist in the sense that I'm not burning crosses or I'm not going out and yelling slurs or whatever. We have to acknowledge that racism is a spectrum, and that all of us unfortunately have ingested some degree of racism, whether we wanted to or not. And so particularly for those of you who are entering spaces as a white person, acknowledging that, not confirmation bias, what's that word I'm looking for? Subconscious bias is going to be prevalent, and then you're going to have to challenge that for yourself. And that's going to be a lot of work on your own end. And it is unfair of you to ask marginalized folks to help you work through that, because that is a lot of emotional labor for a person of color to go through. So understand that you're going to have to do a lot of work on your own end beyond NCORE, right? Before, during, and after NCORE, that may include looking up YouTube videos, looking up TED Talks about race and racism, looking up books. If you want to work through it externally in a way, I would suggest talking to somebody like Tim Wise. Tim Wise is going to be there probably. He's almost always there at NCORE. Looking up Robin DiAngelo, other white folks that may be there who can work through that with you. There is a white caucus, and that is not a white caucus in the sense of like, oh, let's work through our guilt and work through our white woman tears, but so much as like, how can I do better? So that is something to really think about and analyze, and not put on, again, on emotional labor on people of color.
And so Sedelta, I'll turn that question back over to you. What are some of the hard takeaways?
Sorry, I had to unmute. I think part of the hard takeaways for me were the relationships that I've created. I often refer to NCORE as my family because they have seen me grow through so many things. The people there, the resources have been hard takeaways. I've had conversations with people at NCORE that have changed me in so many different ways. I saw Peggy McIntosh one time and we were talking, and she walked me through internal oppression that I was feeling because I was telling her some things I was going through. And to have someone like Peggy McIntosh walk you through that and teach you in that moment, it's profound. The resources are definitely takeaways. The people that you meet could also be resources for others. You could bring them to your campus. I think that's really important. I know that from different NCORE conferences, I've brought some of the speakers and presenters to the campus that I used to work on. And I think that was really invaluable. And I think just the overall experiences that you have while you're there.
Okay. Well, those are all the questions that I have prepared. We have one question from Aggie24, who says, I'm not clear on what was meant by not being centered. Does someone want to jump in there? I'm assuming that we were talking about that NCORE is not a white-centered space.
So, and I was thinking about how to best answer that not being centered part. And the thing is, like, when you identify or pass as white, if you are straight, if you're a heterosexual, if you're able-bodied, all the non-marginalized identities, being able to say what you want to say and do things that you want to do without fear of repercussions. That's what I think of personally as far as being centered, because there's like a saying, like, what would the mediocre white guy do in this scenario, right? And that is something that I don't have the privilege of doing because I am the only person in my position, or I'm the only person that looks like me in this position, right? So I can't freely say or do what I want to say or do, as opposed to somebody who's maybe a white, straight, able-bodied, upper middle class man would do, right? So if you hold any of those identities, or if you're not marginalized in any way, being able to understand that we're not going to be able to answer all the questions to what you want, right? We're looking at who's in the audience and knowing that there's going to be a majority of people of color in there, and we're trying to center ourselves first and center the needs of our communities.
I'd like Emma to answer this question because she talked about specifically that that the space is not centered around whiteness, and I want you to talk about what that means.
Absolutely. Yeah, everything that Nathan has shared with you is right on. And what I experience that to be for me is that it's an active space. It's just not expecting to be looked after, not expecting that my needs come first, not expecting that I'm always comfortable, not expecting that, and that's okay, and that's not inactive. And so not being centered doesn't mean that you're not an active participant in that group or the room or whatever it is. We just do it in a different way because our hegemonic culture here teaches us that the way that we curry for safety is to know more, to speak more, to dominate, to take what we need. And to not be centered means that you don't do that, and you don't get to do that, and they're not actually given to you, so that feels uncomfortable for people who haven't ever experienced that before. And it's active, so that's the piece that I think it was Mycall that was speaking to, where it's and Sedelta, where there's a listening with a generosity and an intent to understand and incorporate and understand the name of the person who's talking, and the layers and the story that's come, and the information that they're actually sharing with you. That's how I experience not being centered. Does that help?
That's very helpful. So I have a colleague who a couple of months ago told me that a white person shared with her that being comfortable as a white person is like breathing. And discomfort is like holding your breath, right? So the normal state, this is coming from a white person who shared this with her. A normal state is comfort. And anything less than that is discomfort and abnormal. And so when you are in a space of all people of color who have been marginalized by the dominant group, there is going to be a lot of discomfort. A lot, right? I mean, I'm sure that there's some discomfort now. But you get 4,000 people in a room in one space talking about, some of the issues that are going on their campus, there's going to be a lot of discomfort. And so if we can equate, just based on this analogy, if we equate discomfort with like breathing, right, we then have a level of understanding of what it means to be in that space. Does anybody else have any thoughts about being centered or not being centered?
I think that for the most, oh, I'm sorry, Nathan is on. Nope, Nathan's gone, okay. I think you all touched on it, but I do think that like, not being centered can look like a lot of things we name, but it also can just be in like who is turned to as like expert or knowledge, who's being turned to or who's being checked on, the language that's being used. Like I think that, going to NCORE on occasions with white folks who I'm colleagues with, or white folks who I know, or whatever, I've heard some folks say that it's like some of the language even in the space can just feel different. So I hope that a conference at NCORE and a lot of the sessions you'll be in, maybe you'll hear things like anti-Blackness or like white supremacy, like really like normal, like in happenstance, things that people will just say, and that might make you feel really uncomfortable and be like, yee, not me, or yikes, I'm ugh. And no one's gonna stop saying those things at this time because you're in that space. I think this is again that time when you need to really lean into the other white folks in those spaces. Maybe have a friend or a mentor, someone who's maybe gone to NCORE before. And I'm sure, I don't want to put like Emma on the spot, but I'm sure if you like see Emma or see another white person who maybe you are in the same session and you hear someone say like white supremacy and you're all prickled up and like uncomfortable, and you see this other white person and they're like, not prickled up, go talk to that person. I'm sure they can really help you navigate through what that means. And I also want to just name that, like, it's super important, as much as I think it's really important for white folks to really do their work at NCORE, like, I think what's most important is like that people of color are able to do our work and be in community with one another and centering that. So even in our like desires to like talk about what it is to be a white person at NCORE, like I don't want us to lose the importance of what it means for many folks of color, Black and brown folk, who are also doing this work, who are also like doing the work and being marginalized at the same time. So.
And, you know, I would add that, you know, when we talk about being centered, like the norm in this country is whiteness and being white. I'm not the norm. If you think of what normal is, it's not me. And in this space, that's not the case. Not only that, the space was kind of created by people of color and marginalized people. The actual sessions were created by us and for us. And it's one of the first times where we get to walk in a space where that's the case, because generally that's not how the world works. So I think that's kind of another thing that we're talking about when we're saying that, you know, you're not centered in that space.
I think also something to keep in mind is if you're going there with colleagues or you make a connection with somebody there who's a person of color, understanding, and if you're a white person, is understanding that we may react in ways that are much more honest. And, you know, because some of these workshops will really hit on some layers or traumas or experiences. And so you're going to get some really honest answers and responses from people of color. And that could be anything from, you know, us being maybe a little bit curt or angry or upset, and then giving us that space to work through that and not taking the microphone, so to speak, you know, one diva, one mic kind of rule, you know, and also understanding that when we're talking about white supremacy, yes, it does feel like we're just lumping all white people as like all of you are terrible, and understanding is like, well, imagine how we feel when we all get lumped as like, well, all of this group or of this people of color, like we're not a monolith. So acknowledging that you as a white person going to NCORE, yes, great, you're doing the work, you're trying to interrogate these things and you're trying to do better, but you're also not the white savior of all things that went wrong. So acknowledging that you should not be the white savior, but that you can do steps and take actions to make your institutions better. We're also not going to give you this reward medal of like, yay, you attended NCORE as a white person, right? So understanding that, again, NCORE is for a lot of different communities that are consistently marginalized in academic settings.
So I want to highlight two things as we bring, because I don't want to scare folks from coming to the conference, right? Like, so I want to bring it back to kind of some programming stuff and some responses. One of my experiences was that facilitators are not interested in commiserating, right? So yes, there are challenges across campuses. Yes, there are consistent struggles with marginalized communities, but that NCORE should not be the place, or the session should not be the place to be constantly commiserating about those things, right? This is about change, this is about information, this is about connection, and so be prepared to come and learn and while you're in the sessions. There may be opportunities to commiserate at dinner, at coffee. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, one of the things that I'm learning in my progression in academia is that this is really all about who you know, from campus to campus, even on your own campus, right? You get opportunities based on someone who knows the work that you can do, and they saw you speak at some place and ... right? And if we know that the university is centered in whiteness, then we know how important then those connections become between people of color in order to have opportunity. So the business cards become really important. The lunches and the coffee becomes really important. You know, the side conversations become really important so that you begin to build those networks almost like your own green book of academia, so that you can navigate this thing and have the same kinds of opportunities that are given just based on who people are sometimes. Are there any other questions from the group? We've been answering questions, which I'm so grateful for this panel, okay? Because folks are on answering questions. I appreciate you all. One of the questions that we didn't talk about, and we have a little bit of time, is what should I bring to the conference? Let's start with Mycall.
Okay, here's a little secret tip. Bring a tote bag that's not that's empty. So you're gonna get to NCORE, right? And they're gonna give you this really cute tote bag. It's gonna have like some knickknacks and the guidebook we've been talking about if you want that hard copy. But here's the gag about it, is that everybody gets the same tote bag. And so I've noticed that for me, it becomes really complicated when you're in a session or moving around. Everyone has the same tote bag. And in fact, everyone has the same booklet inside said tote bag because you just got it. So I recommend bringing in, and you know, add a little flair to your outfits for the week or what have you, to bringing a different kind of tote bag or something like that will allow for you to be able to be like, oh, that's mine, I know where this is. And I think just have a little more peace of mind as opposed to getting lost in the milieu of bags and things of that nature. As well as bringing an open mind and a bottle of water. Because you're going to do a lot of walking and talking, and I think those things are really important to bring.
Emma.
Sure. So what I was thinking of, and I don't even know who I'm channeling in here because we've had this conversation a couple of times. So definitely, I need to bring my journals and pens and a readiness, excitement. It's only a month away, so I'm pretty excited about this. Just trying to think. Water bottles. Did you say that, Mycall? Yeah, got it. Yeah, okay. I'm out.
So definitely echoing that. Note-taking devices, as I mentioned earlier, I type faster than I write. So I am definitely one that brings a laptop. I would say spare battery, external battery for your cell phone. If you're one of those people that wears many hats on your respective campuses and you need to make sure your department is not on fire while you're on your at the conference. So some sort of external battery to take with you in between sessions so you don't have to all crowd around the one little outlet that might or might not be in your room. In your sessions, anything that you use for self-care. As I mentioned earlier, my self-care is working out. So bringing in some workout clothes to go explore in, or some casual clothes that are not kind of work related, so to speak. So that way I can go explore the town.
Definitely something for note-taking, your charger or the backup battery if you have that. I never do this, I always forget, but bring your business cards. And then like Nathan said earlier, it helps to have notes on them to tell who that person is, what you were talking about, and something to keep those cards in. Comfortable shoes are always a really good thing to bring because oftentimes, whether it's in a convention center or the hotel, it's a big place and you're going to be walking and doing a ton of walking at that time. So you want to be comfortable. And then, yeah, bring an open mind and be ready to have fun.
So I'm originally from California, and the West Coast is, I'm from the Bay Area, so closer to Portland. It's cold. Bring a jacket. and a sweater, a couple of them, because that part of the country gets cooler than, say, Texas, right? Or Florida or the East Coast in May. Bring some money, because there's an exhibit hall, where there'll be lots of books for purchase and clothes and jewelry. Portland has great food. Every place in the Northwest has great food though, but lots of great food. We have about 30 some odd days before the conference begins. So put $3 up a day, $5 a day, get you a little bit of change to buy at least a good book to be signed by someone. So Marcia asked, how cold is cold out there in May? So what I was told is that it's going to be about between 55 and 65 degrees. That's cold to me. I need a jacket, because 55 to 65 degrees on the West Coast is way different than 55 to 65 degrees in Oklahoma. We live for 65-degree days here. Out there, you need a coat.
I would also say that the rooms can be cold.
Yes.
So anytime you're in a convention center or conference, they're going to be cold.
We have another question. It says, speaking of working out as a form of self-care, does NCORE provide workout sessions and or running walking groups so others interested in exercise can participate together? We do not have anything like that formally in programming, but you are more than welcome to start it, right? I was on Twitter recently, and when the conference was announced, someone had tweeted out something like, I'm going to NCORE, anybody else going, right? So Twitter and Facebook and Instagram using the hashtags becomes an online community. You can certainly use social media to try to create your own community space doing what you want to do there. Someone is said in the chat box. Oh, okay, so someone said it's cold and possibly rainy at that time. Bring scarves to wear to manage the different temperatures. So that's good. So Danae says, this will be my first time at NCORE, my first time in Portland. My colleagues and I have been going back and forth about hotels since the first batch of hotels were sold out. Therefore, what would be your recommendation between a hotel downtown to the Residence Inn that looks likable? Okay. I have never been to Portland. I don't know spatially where things are. Nathan, do you have a response?
So NCORE, if you are staying on the hotels in downtown, which is the opposite side of the convention center, I have been told that NCORE will provide, thank you, light rail, because traffic in Portland is a nightmare. I visited Portland a couple years back, and it took us about an hour or two to travel maybe a couple miles. It was excruciating. Root canals are more entertaining than the traffic in Portland. So I would recommend public transit. There is also I noticed that there were bike rentals on the map. So that is an option as well if you are the physical type or don't mind biking or walking. And so those are some options as far as transit. If you can avoid traffic or peak traffic times, I would highly recommend that.
It also looks like the participants that we have online today, we have some folks in Portland. So this is a great way to connect as well. You could, if you're looking for a community, looking for something to do, we have 55 people in the chat. This may be a good place to start in terms of where to stay, exercise, food, all kinds of things. I encourage you to connect with each other.
I think something to also keep in mind, because you're in the Pacific Northwest, is that Sedelta, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a huge Native American community out there in the Pacific Northwest. There's a huge Pacific Islander community in the Northwest. I think the one caveat that I have about Oregon is that Oregon historically is a sundown state. So that is something I noticed when I visited Portland. It was like, where are the folks with the melanin? you really have to intentionally seek out those spaces if you are looking to be in just community without the academic setting, right? So to be local. So if you're looking, if you have some extra time, or if you need to connect with communities, I'd say look into local community organizations as well. Sedelta, Mycall, I don't know if you want to speak to that too.
So one of the things I do really quickly, one of the things that I've been thinking through as we go to Portland, and I've had some friends who live there, I have not been, and just thinking through some of similar sentiments of a sundown town. I've been working on some like unofficial kind of guides. I know NCORE has some stuff on their website, and I want to honor that because they definitely have been doing some of that work to talk through restaurants and things of that nature. But I oftentimes meet folks at these conferences, and unfortunately, the conference is also your vacation. And so sometimes folks are kind of just like, what do I do? And maybe want to see other kind of like POC-owned restaurants or venues, things of that nature. And I'm very close to a first draft of some of the stuff that I'm happy to share with folks and NCORE and other people to make sure that, you know, you're thinking about where your dollar's going and things of that nature. I've talked to a few folks who have done some work out in Portland. I'm in conversation with the Q Center at, which is like an LGBT org out in Portland, finally, and a few other little odds and ends. So hopefully that's put away before the 27th of May. But I'm excited to share that with anyone who's interested in any of that information, because I want to make sure that, you know, you're able to make the most of your experience with NCORE.
Mycall, would you mind giving your email address out so folks can email?
Oh, I sure can. Now it's a busy week, so don't expect nothing quick. But if you want to email me if you're interested, my email address is mriley21@depaul.edu, and I'll put it in the chat as well, so you all can see that. But mriley21@depaul.edu is my email. I'm happy to talk more about that.
Excellent. So we have 9 minutes left, and I just want to close with some final thoughts if there are no more questions. Yeah, so Nathan, if you, or everyone, if you want to put your Twitter or your Facebook, if that's what you're interested in the chat so people can connect with you, or your email address in the chat, that'd be great. But I just want to close with some final thoughts about NCORE, kind of what it means to you and what you're looking forward to this year. We'll start with you, Emma, and we'll work our way up to Sedelta.
Okay, sorry, I was looking at questions. So what I'm really looking forward to about NCORE this year is that there is a group of us on my campus that are committing and going, and led by Emily Drew, pulling us together and really strategically figuring out how to kind of use our time and the honor of being able to attend and participate and learn and bring it back to our community here as well, in service to the work that's going on. So that thing I'm really excited to, seeing some folks that I haven't seen since last year, and that's really super exciting too. So.
And Nathan?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I was like looking at questions.
Sort of like, what are you looking forward to this year?
For the NCORE?
Yes.
Escaping from the heat. But escaping from the heat, escaping from the mosquitoes, because I get eaten alive. But really also reconnecting with community and exploring more of Portland and connecting more with the Pacific Islander community, because I've always worked at institutions where we didn't have like huge Pacific Islander communities. So I'm hoping to connect more with that, because listening to Pacific Islander narratives and their experiences in higher education was very enlightening, and I realized that there was more that I needed to learn. So definitely getting some content knowledge and connecting with folks in learning things that I did not realize that I did not know.
Let me think. I think the sense of communities is always my foremost, like first and foremost, excuse me, kind of joy of NCORE. I get the privilege of facilitating with some folks for about 3 years now, doing a pre-con on supporting non-binary and trans students of color. I present with a couple other folks doing some other really cool work, and that is always like such a joy and a space of refuge. I'm also really challenging myself to really like lean back into like learning things again, sometimes again, like maybe hopefully some things for the first time, but also like connecting back to things that maybe feel like introductory as I continue to try and like find new ways to explain and engage with topics that can be really complex for some folks. So I'm gonna hold myself accountable to like maybe trying to go to new sessions or things that maybe other folks haven't, maybe that wouldn't be my go-to kind of presentation.
I'm looking forward to seeing all of my friends that are going to be there. The keynotes look really great this year. Looking forward to the vendors. They have some incredible vendors there, so I'm looking forward to that as well. I think one thing that's kind of interesting about Portland is Ashland is a few hours away, but the 1491s, which is their native comedy group, they have written a play that is being performed there. So it's kind of cool because I'm going to go in early to go over there to see the play. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And just some of the conversations that we'll be having during that time.
We have had a total of, I believe, 9 webinars since August. So I've made some new colleague friends that I'm looking forward to meeting in person. I didn't know anyone at NCORE last year, and now I know like tons of people, and I can't wait to hang out with them in that space. Well, I am so grateful to have had you all with us today. I'm glad that you all were able to provide your information to our attendees, and our attendees, please feel free to reach out and connect so that when you get to NCORE, you'll have some friends too, and you'll know some folks in the building. So thank you again for your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us. Bye. See everyone in Portland.